Thanks, you all for coming this morning. I thought it would be helpful to meet with the members of the HRC and stakeholders so they could answer directly for readers some of the questions that have been raised at some community meetings in the past few weeks and at some rallies, and some folks have been making some pretty bold statements about what is and what isn't going on in the community. And so I was hoping to hear from you all in your own words as to where you see the HRC and the stakeholders group at this time. So I drafted these questions, and we'll take those sort of in order, but also feel free to add any subjects or in any other explanations that you'd like to. As a starting point, I thought it would be helpful if you all would explain the difference between the Human Relations Commission and the stakeholders group, and if that's important. So.
Well, I think it's important to define the stakeholders and the involvement of community organizations in the stakeholders, HRC, and this goes back to the history that I'm sure either Sandy or Christy would be more than happy to add to. But in 2006 is when the stakeholders originally convened, and in light of a lot of the issues that have resurfaced with law enforcement and police and community relations recently, that's why the original stakeholders were reached out to come together and address some of those issues. They have had past experience and have been involved in addressing police community issues, and I thought that it would be a good idea, again, in light of what's been going on recently with the police community relations, to reconvene this group.
Was there a particular issue in 2006 that triggered the forming of the stakeholders?
There were several issues back in 2006, and I think to elaborate on what Christine had mentioned too, the difference between the two groups, the Human Relations Commission is a organization created by the city and the county of Pueblo through an intergovernmental agreement to serve as the catalyst to build community relations in a variety of ways, but also deal with community issues. That being said, in 2006, there were some issues. We had a police shooting down by the Sangre de Cristo apartments. We also had a gentleman that, through police was died because of tasering.
In custody, while he was in custody?
Christy can elaborate more on that. I wasn't with it.
Related to tasering.
Right. So we really felt that we needed to bring a group of community leaders, stakeholders, to really start talking about the community's concerns as it related to law enforcement. As a result of that, we were able to work with the police and the sheriff's department, primarily the police department, to really look at policies, and we were very instrumental, and again, Christy could speak to this a lot more, in revising the taser policy for the police department, and really also educating the community on what that means. Many of the policies were then put on the website, so the community could actually view what those were, and I think that continues to be ongoing. So I don't know that it was any one particular incident, but there were some issues that we felt that we as a community needed to start having conversations with law enforcement to start addressing them.
Who was on that original stakeholders group? Was that the first time it was pulled together?
Well, it was, but there's even more history prior to the stakeholders group, historically, that organizations have come together and community leaders to address law enforcement and community relations. The original stakeholders were the Latino Chamber, HRC, Department of Justice was there, and the Department of Justice was there to really help moderate the conversation and to bring that transparency to the table, that all the state group members were there in good faith, and with the goal of finding solutions.
Were they, in a sense, a prod, or simply a monitor or moderator?
Moderator.
Moderator. Okay.
Right. Who else were the original stakeholders?
LULAC.
LULAC.
Crime Stoppers, Arc of Pueblo, The district attorney's office, chief of police, as well as the sheriff's office.
Sheriff's office was not.
The sheriff,
No.
mm-mm. However, we had conversations about the conditions at the jail at that time, where we were able to work with the sheriff's department to make some pretty significant changes there as well.
Was that a fairly willing group to participate, or was law enforcement participating under duress?
No, they were very much at the table in good faith and goodwill.
And the result, among the results, as far as the community should be aware of, was a change in taser policies, and what?
Christy, do you want to address that since you were
Sure.
chair of the law enforcement?
Sure, and if you don't mind, I'd like to go back just a
Sure.
little bit to be real clear about the differences between HRC and the stakeholders group. Because HRC came together in 2000, but as a result of some history that goes back to the 70s, where it was originally a project that was abandoned back then. It was resurrected in 2000 as a result of some race relations discussions that occurred in '98, I believe, where Sandy was instrumental in putting together these forums
Right.
and resulted in the creation of HRC. The actual vision and mission of HRC is to act as a catalyst. And so when we talk about being a catalyst, we have to have the ability in the community when those issues arise that there's a venue for disgruntled people who feel that they've been victims of discrimination or police brutality, a venue for them to come. HRC's role in that is to be the catalyst and to bring the issues before the people who actually have decision-making ability, the decision makers, the players, in effect, the stakeholders. So when we talk about the stakeholders group, that was something that we put together to respond to the issues that were coming before the HRC. So HRC is basically acting as the catalyst to bring those community issues to the decision makers. And when we talk about the stakeholders group, individuals were identified to come to the table to respond to the issues that were happening in the community.
That's why the police and the DA and others were in that group to
Yes.
begin with, so they could directly respond
Absolutely.
to complaints and questions being raised.
Correct. And the Department of Justice has actually been a huge supporter of HRC from the get-go. And they've done a lot of training with HRC about how to handle issues that arise in the community. And some of those being, we've done marshalling classes so that we can attend the Columbus Day events.
Okay.
And there's no duress. It's actually the Office of Community Relations Services, which is a little bit different than the judicial arm of DOJ. So they are more, they've always been supportive of HRC and give us a lot of direction. So whenever we come into issues that require, whether they be mediation, facilitation, conciliation, they are always there to support the effort. And they've come in and act as mediator, not necessarily mediator, but more facilitator of these discussions.
So the stakeholders group is basically sort of the organization of all the people who are in decision-making roles, that in a sense they are there to discuss these issues when they come up, and the HRC is the facilitator who sort of raises the question when these come up. That's when you bring the stakeholders together to talk about whatever
Yes.
it is that the community is concerned about.
Yes, sir. So in 2006.
So it doesn't meet all the time. It's not.
No.
But it's there as an organization. That is its structure, as to when the need arises.
Yes.
You take the issues to them.
And the result of the 2006 Stakeholders Convention, if you want to call it that, was an agreement that was made public wherein everybody at the table agreed to some ways that we could improve police-community relations. And those things were, does anybody have the stakeholders group? Okay. So if you look at the players who were present at the time in 2006, several of the people are no longer in those decision-making capacities, right? So we have a different district attorney, we have a different police chief. So as these recent issues came to light, we agreed that it was a good idea to recall the stakeholders group together to revisit the old stakeholders agreement and perhaps discuss some additional methods of improving police-community relations as they currently existed with new leadership. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, that's good. Those are the issues, I think. That's sort of what we're looking for. So talk, if you would mind, explain, have you revived that stakeholders discussion in the light of the recent incidents on the east side and other things that have come more to the larger community's attention because of folks drawing attention to it, or what's the status now, and what are you?
You know, it's very interesting because I believe that the stakeholders group reconvened and then issues came up at the same time that we were just beginning discussion. So, there's always been discourse in the community about law enforcement relations, but it seems like some flashpoint will happen and it will cause everything to come to light again. So while we were starting to revisit issues with the stakeholders group is when other things started to happen. The issue on the Mesa Junction, the issues on the east side. So it sort of took a dual track. And I guess what's unfortunate is part of the stakeholders group, and when we do these discussions with the stakeholders group, we've all agreed that the players at the table are trying to build a level of trust and confidence amongst the people at the table, because we've expanded the group this time to include members of the sheriff department, to include members of the community who were involved with these issues in the past. And one of the things that we've agreed to is the need to have confidentiality during these discussions in an effort to build trust, because law enforcement is equally as distrustful of specific community members as are those community members distrustful from law enforcement. So in order to build that rapport at the table, we've agreed that in order for conversations to flow freely, we needed to agree in order to be as productive as possible in these meetings, because they are long and tedious, that we needed to have the ability to trust one another at the table to know that those discussions would remain confidential until we've reached the conclusion to build on the issues that arise in the new stakeholders agreement that we're currently working on. And that's where I think, as painful as that process is, it's absolutely necessary to protect the integrity of those negotiations.
So when, at some of these community meetings, for example, when Professor McGettigan tells the audience, well, these are closed-door meetings that you're keeping the community out of, the answer is these are meetings that are been worked out where the participants are agreeing to work together, I guess in a confidential way for the purposes of mutual trust. And how would you characterize it then when folks say, oh, but you're doing everything behind closed doors and we don't get to participate?
Yes, I believe it's necessary for the HRC to reach out to community members and reassure them that the HRC is the vehicle to bring those concerns to, and that HRC will act in good faith carrying those concerns to the stakeholders meetings.
But they have very different roles, HRC from the stakeholders.
Absolutely. And I mean, stakeholders deals with police community relations at this point in a vacuum, where HRC deals with issues of discrimination across the board, and law enforcement community relations is just one small aspect of the issues that HRC deals with. And it's HRC's hope to build that credibility in the community that individuals that have issues with law enforcement that are not comfortable and free enough to go out and make a complaint with internal affairs, which that seems to be an issue, trust with internal affairs, that they can come to HRC and know that HRC is going to do its very best to resolve the issues either internally within the police department or identify systemic issues that need to be brought to the stakeholders group in hopes that those issues will be resolved internally by the people who have the capacity to make those decisions.
How would you characterize current police community relations? Are there new problems that have sort of fed this this recent sort of, I guess more public incidents, or is it just the fact that the media is aware of them? I mean, there's all kinds of factors that drive these sorts of things. How would you characterize it today? Is there a need to bring the stakeholders together because there are new issues in the community, or just even if the community perceives that there are issues, you need to bring the stakeholders together to talk about them, because even that ripples out and affects day-to-day relations? I mean, how would you characterize police-community relations today?
I think, not speaking on the police-community relations, I believe that the stakeholders reconvening at this time is appropriate because of the difference in the characters. We do have a new district attorney, we do have a new police chief, we also have a new executive director to HRC, so the players are different, and I think that it's important that these individuals came back together to address maybe even just renewing their and letting them know about the stakeholders agreement as it stood from 2006. Just informing them that it existed. And if there's something that we need to add to or modify or update on the stakeholders agreement, then that's it would be a good time to bring in the new players.
I wasn't there in 2006, but 2006 they didn't agree on everything then. And I doubt if we'll agree on everything this time. So it's an attempt to get together on things we can agree on and to help the community.
What does the agreement actually cover?
Well, and we're happy to leave a copy of this with you. It's a public document, but it talks about, perceived lack of transparency, and some of the issues that we address. I'll be happy to leave
Sure,
a copy of
sure.
this with you, but
Can we put it on our website so folks
why
can read
not?
it?
Absolutely. It's a public document, and I think it would be awesome. But it basically covered the topics of public education, advocacy, cultural competency, citizens review board, and a conclusion was drawn. And when Mr. Brown speaks of the fact that we didn't agree on everything, one of the issues we didn't agree on was the need for a citizen review board. But it's a topic that will continue to be discussed, and HRC acting in its capacity as the catalyst, if the community continues to cry for that. And I think, going back to your original question about the current status, I guess, of police-community relations, it's one that ebbs and flows, where it often there's deep community mistrust of law enforcement that, like I say, a flashpoint will occur, and yes, there have been recent flashpoints that have caused the community to restate those concerns. I think, Sandy or Doris, somebody talk a little bit about, because I see things in my eyes, and I want to know what is your perception of what you think the status of police-community relations are right now in the community.
I am sort of involved in two organizations that deal with victims, Child Advocacy Center and the YWCA. And in my view, I think that both of those organizations have a very positive relationship with the police department. They rely on them, they have a good relationship, and they feel that the particular police officers that they work with care intensely about the victims.
Well, and I think, Christy, from my perspective, you kind of hit it. It's kind of a coincidence that we brought the stakeholders group together and these issues are coming up, concerns from the community. So I don't know that there was any one thing that triggered us coming together. I think it was just all of this stuff. It was timing. Yes, there have been some concerns brought up by the community, so.
And do you think that's because the situation has changed, or just new players out in the community that, because at the city council level, I hear periodically about police matters, but it seems like there's a new activism or agitation or perhaps unhappiness in some communities that with how with their relations with the police department. I hear more complaints about individual officer behavior and such. I didn't know if that, as you said, sometimes things ebb and flow. I just was asking, you probably hear more from the community. Is this a good time to be bringing this stuff up, because the community perceives a real problem that needs addressing?
I think the one thing that we need to do as a community, if we haven't done it good enough yet, is that we need to have ongoing conversations with our law enforcement to continue to build relations between law enforcement and the community.
And there is no other organization right at the moment outside the stakeholders group where those conversations take place
Not that I'm aware of.
in a forthright way?
Yep, not that I'm aware of. So we need to create an institutional process by which these conversations continue. So we're not reacting to situations, we're actually continuing to build trust and build opportunities to enhance relations.
Proactively.
Absolutely.
Let's come back to the question, do we call it a citizen review board or a community review board? Either one. Obviously, that has come up as a topic at some recent public meetings and demands from certain groups saying this is necessary now. Give us a little background of your discussions in the stakeholders group with law enforcement. I mean, it sounds as if this is an issue you have been talking about both at the HRC and perhaps in the stakeholders for some time. Where does it stand? Is this something?
Well, I think the important thing is we need to get beyond the perception that the stakeholders group is having discussions for that reason and that reason only. In the end of these conversations, if the stakeholders group believes that a citizen review board is necessary, then that will be a consensus and we come to an agreement. That's not the sole purpose of the stakeholders group. Any organization or individual in our community can help push the effort forward to create that. But again, we're coming to the table in good faith to determine that at the end if indeed that's going to be necessary.
And the consensus in the past, it sounded as if you were unable to reach agreement on this back in, is this 2006 or 2008?
This is 2006.
2006?
Yes.
Because basically everyone at the table wanted it and law enforcement didn't?
No.
I mean, I think that's always the perception, is that law enforcement
Sure.
doesn't want this.
Sure. Well, and honestly, that in my experience, that's sort of way things go, right? And we spoke a little bit about, I wanted other people to address the issue of as police complaints or community
Sure.
members complaining about police department, because as Doris indicated, her experience and her outreach is with victims. My experience and my outreach is with defendants. And so I think it's always more important to get a very clear view from everybody what they believe the status of law enforcement community relations. And in my personal experience and in my work, I consistently see people having issues with law enforcement, whether they be issues of disrespect, issues of use of force. And when we talked earlier about HRC and the stakeholders being the only venue that the community has an opportunity to weigh in on issues of law enforcement, that is a sad state of affairs. And so it is incumbent upon HRC and the stakeholders group to continue to pursue the community unrest with law enforcement. And when we talk about a citizens review board, that is just one option in allowing the community to participate in law enforcement oversight. And I feel like in my personal work and in my work with HRC, that's really the bottom line of where the community is requesting, and I think you're going to get factions and extremes on one end and the other of what people really actually want. But take a broad view, I believe that what we'd like to see come out of this is some level of participation from the community to continually engage in whether it be oversight, participation, some level of commitment to seeing that law enforcement and community relations continue to improve, because HRC and stakeholders group has been the only venue afforded to community members to weigh in on the situation.
Well, and Peter, I think it's also important to mention that while we didn't come to an agreement or consensus to create a citizen review board, the critical incident team was created as a result of these conversations.
And if I could just go back, I'm not, I said this the other day and I think people looked at me like, wow, I can't believe that's coming out of her mouth, but not just the people who wish to have a citizen review board do I believe HRC needs to do outreach to. I think we need to hear from members of the community who believe it's not necessary. And I think in order to gain credibility from law enforcement and community members, we have to do a significant amount of outreach to bring, short of doing a ballot measure, whether it's necessary, this is going to be the best way to get community input on the issue, right? Of whether the community believes citizen involvement in law enforcement oversight is absolutely necessary.
Difficult issue because most people don't have an opinion unless they've had an encounter with law enforcement
Correct.
that wasn't what they were expecting.
Correct.
And so, to a certain degree, only the informed public, the people who've actually worked in relationships with law enforcement, are in a position to sort of have that judgment. For the person who's only encountered with the police to see them go by in their car,
Right.
it doesn't really have a feel for what's going on in the community.
And I believe you've really hit an issue that's really important on the head, because most people, when these flash bangs happen and they come out, because it has affected them personally, it has affected their family. And in our most recent debate, or not debate, it was a community forum, Professor McGettigan, I understand and see his frustration with the system. And I'm very proud of Sandy Barella. She was one who was exactly in a situation where she was frustrated with law enforcement back in early 2000, and she did come to an HRC, and she has remained involved in the process. And some of the work we've done has been at her request, and she's pushed for those issues. And now she comes to sit at the table, and she actually comes to sit at the stakeholders group. But it took her a long time to gain that sort of credibility with law enforcement, that she wasn't just out to get them. She was actually concerned about improving relations. So I challenged Mr. McGettigan at the time that we had the forum to stay involved in the process, because in the end it is a fruitful process, but it's just a sort of a painstaking process, because as you indicated, unless you've had some personal experience with law enforcement that maybe was not negative, your whole perception of things is going to be based in that on that issue. And it's really difficult to gain any sort of sympathy for what in essence I'm going to call the clientele that my office represents.
People arrested.
Right, they're arrested, and thank God we live in a country where they're innocent until they're proven guilty, and that sometimes I believe tends to get lost, and there's a real difficulty gaining any sort of sympathy or empathy from the community to advocate on behalf of the individuals who are under arrest.
What would you tell folks who are momentarily energized and saying, by God, we don't have to take this anymore, or blah, blah, blah. And we're saying, well, the stakeholders and the HRC have been around for years, and yet these incidents still happen, as if somehow you were going to make them go away. But what would you tell them to do in terms of participate in the HRC, continue to do their own thing? How would you advise people who are, community people who are finding a reason to be cognizant of this and wanting to get some accountability? Come to the HRC and make that vehicle work, or what?
Definitely come to the HRC, but the only reason HRC has looked at this since I've been on. We've studied the Denver model for the police review board, but they have a like $1.8 million budget, and I don't see us coming up with that kind of money to do that. And even that model has problems. I mean, it's not going to satisfy everybody. So the only reason why we're having this discussion now is because all these people are upset. So my thing, keep pushing. I mean, come before council, come to HRC. I mean, at least 2 of these groups haven't come to HRC. So the only way that this is gonna be solved is for people like Dr. McGinnigan and all these other groups to press for some type of a police review. That's,
I had a conversation with a friend of mine who is a police officer, and I said to her point blank, "What do you think about a police review board?" And she said, "I would have no objection to a police review board as long as the members of that board were trained and had some idea of what police officers actually go through to be trained and what they actually go through on a day-to-day basis in their lives as police officers." And I was really surprised at her response when she said she would have no problem if those people were trained and educated about what police officers actually do on a day-to-day basis.
Is that where this, do you think this discussion is heading? In the sense that even if folks come to the HRC, it will be, in a sense, a request for more public accountability? Which it seems to be the most common venue right now is some sort of community or citizen view. I know City Council the other night, in voting to keep its faith with the HRC as the venue for this, there seemed to be some subtitles or some suggestion that, well, you know, we can't promise you that the Citizen Review Board is going to come out of this, but there was almost a sort of like, this is where this public discussion is headed, and is, I guess what I'm asking is for folks who think that somehow the HRC and the stakeholders are doing things privately and out of the community side. Do you have a feel like, is that where the discussion is still going, even in your stakeholder meetings? Is a request for more public accountability?
I don't
or
think.
Can you not?
I don't think
promise
that we're
anything?
prepared to make that determination yet, because we as a stakeholders group have not come to that conclusion. We've had the discussion, but in the end, I think collectively there's a consensus that there's got to be some accountability. What that looks like at this point is still to be determined. And I think, Peter, the other thing regarding City Council the other night is there's a lot of misinformation out in the community about the stakeholders group, and I think this is a great opportunity to be able to, get on the record and answer those questions. And anybody that's out there that wants to be involved in these conversations, we just encourage you to get a hold of the Human Relations Commission. We will continually have law enforcement or police forums to have them involved with that discussion as well. That information will be brought to the stakeholders group, so we can have those discussions with the group. And again, what it's going to be when it's all said and done, I think it's premature to say that at this point, because we're still having the discussion.
Is there anything you'd like to talk about we haven't touched on?
I think it's important that that we let these individuals from some of these other groups know that City Council has told individuals that they should work with HRC, and I think that it's important to note that HRC is fully prepared to reach out to those organizations and those groups so that we can do just that and have this discussion. I know that at some point, and because of all the misinformation that is out there, some of these groups are not understanding that we are 100% in support of working with them as well. And I think that they will see that in the next couple of weeks, that we will go out there and reach out to these organizations, to these groups of individuals, and talk with them and see that, we want to hear what their concerns are as well. But when we come to the table, we want it to be in a good process where there's not finger pointing. And I think the fact that it's been stated on many occasions, at least to me, that HRC is not functioning for the purpose it was created, and I'll have to totally disagree with that. I think that the fact that we're not maybe as vocal out there in the public as some of these other groups does not necessarily mean that we're not doing the work.
I would like to add that we appreciate as a commission the opportunity to spend some time with you because the role that the media plays is significant. The Pueblo Chieftain is the source for local information, and most Pueblo residents, I say most, have some access to access that information from the Chieftain. And so the role that the media plays is huge in promoting positive police-community relations. Things that happen out in the community and how they're portrayed in the media and the responsiveness of HRC to those issues is very much defined by and perceived by the community about how it's portrayed in the media. So we sincerely appreciate the opportunity to clear matters up and answer the big picture questions that I'm sure have been coming up all around the community.
So what would you tell somebody right now who said, man, I just had a really lousy experience with a cop Thursday night. I felt like I got really abused, you know, and I hadn't done anything wrong, and you know, what would you tell a community member to say if you're having issues with law enforcement? Who do they call?
Well, first and foremost, I need to jump in there because as a defense person, I would say if you have a criminal case, you just talk to your lawyer and that's all.
Sure, but
Beyond that,
yeah, but this didn't really end up in an arrest or anything.
Gotcha.
This was just an encounter on the corner where you were trying to do something, or a cop assumed you were doing something wrong, and you ended
Sure.
up getting sort of disrespected or blown off or whatever, and you were peeved about it. And who?
You can go online, go to the city website, the police department, and individuals can file their complaints.
Is
If-
that effective from your point? Because to a certain degree, this is what people I think are looking to is the HRC a functioning forum?
Yes.
Where if I was having a real problem
Yes.
that I wasn't going to go get a lawyer for, but I just thought I was being mistreated as a citizen, is the HRC somebody that I call?
Yes, and many people have.
Okay.
And Sandy Barella is one great example, and again, I think we all have a lot of admiration for her sticking with it and now being part of the discussions that help to bring a very personal experience to the table in building those relationships with law enforcement.
and law enforcement has been very responsive to the issues that have come to HRC at least in regard to looking at those issues. Right? I mean,
I would agree.
Christine, you can just get on the phone and contact the chief in a heartbeat, yes?
And I have. When I do have issues that arise, I do call the chief and I'll give you an example without giving too much detail. I had a young lady call me the other day and say that, you know, she's having problems with her ex-husband who is formerly law enforcement, and she's complained to law enforcement, and she didn't feel that she was getting the answers that she needed. I took the time to address those issues with the chief of police, and I'm sure that there's a conversation going on between herself and the chief currently. So any complaint that I get, and I know that I can reach out to the chief on those issues, I most certainly will. And that doesn't go to say, you know, I address issues with the sheriff's office as well. I reach out to Darlene Alcala all the time and go and visit with her with some of these individuals who are upset and would like to have some answers. And that's something that is continual, and we continue to have these conversations and try and come to some resolution.
And I think Peter if HRC was not in existence,
Those individuals wouldn't have that direct contact to either the chief or Darlene or the sheriff.
I think it's important for the public to know that we meet every month. Our meetings are open, and anybody is welcome to come and tell us what problems they have. Our meetings are publicized in the Chieftain, and oftentimes we have nobody show up to indicate that they have problems. So I think that's important for that to be publicized.
And I want to add too that I think we should keep when people have issues with law enforcement, that they should stay connected to the process, continue to push, come to HRC. When you look at the entire movement that exists, or the entire entity that exists in law enforcement, one very powerful aspect of that is the police union. And it seems to sort of be something that's very much misunderstood, perhaps, by the community. That I would encourage the community to just stay in touch with what's going on in Pueblo, with the city, with law enforcement, and that's just one piece of the pie that shouldn't go untouched.
Is there something the stakeholders are working towards at the moment? You said a new agreement?
Yes, sir.
Because you have new players, you have new chiefs, you have new.
Yes.
Okay. So that's the purpose, is to reach a new agreement with the new players, the policymakers in the community? Okay. Is there a timetable for that? Is that likely to happen in, say, 6 months, a year, or 2 weeks?
Not 2 weeks.
Whatever that is,
The stakeholders group is committed to seeing the process through to the end, and not knowing how that's going to develop. We currently have meetings scheduled through the end of July, and an agreement to discuss at the end of July the necessity to continue regular meetings beyond the end of July, and how long it's going to take to develop the new agreement. But there's also discussion about making that group potentially something that endures beyond the signature of the agreement, and with regular quarterly, semi-annual meetings.
Is there any reason to expect that there'll be a change on the community review board with this upcoming agreement?
I think it's premature.
Okay, don't know.
It's,
Okay. I don't know, just from a press point of view, are these meetings open to the public? Is there-
No,
No.
they're not.
well, right.
Okay.
For reasons that she stated, that to build this
That trust.
trust
And I
among
can't
the
think of any
groups.
particular reason, a section of Colorado law that would fall under that would require them to be open. So in essence, the community shouldn't be necessarily waiting for the stakeholders to bring out their community review plan in September and say, here's what we've been working on.
No, but I think the community can look toward the stakeholders group as something that we'll be revealing at some point in time soon, maybe some additional progress in how to improve police-community relations, and some of the efforts that will occur by law enforcement to do some public outreach, do some public education. The issues that, if you would refer again to the original stakeholders agreement, there will be updates and elaboration on all the issues that were touched upon in the original group. So I think the community can be hopeful that while we may not agree on everything in the end, it's a positive progress report about police-community relations, or at least our best effort and best attempt to have a positive progress report.
One very small thing that's come out of this so far is, in discussing with the police, they didn't know who to get a hold of. And they've come up with this brochure that gives contact information.
For the public?
To the public,
Yeah.
yes.
For the public?
Yeah.
And that's as a result of the conversations.